just hit start. So we'll give everybody a minute or two to get in, get settled, grab a drink if you want. I know it's a Wednesday, and sometimes on the East Coast it's 3 o'clock where we are, but might be early on the West Coast. But hey, nobody here is judging that. So we'll let everyone. There we go. We got some folks coming in, so we'll get everybody settled. We'll get things kicked off. Ross, I'll ask the the standard go-to question: how's the weather in the greater Raleigh area right now?
Today it's actually beautiful. We got it's about 73. You got a breeze. We're coming off of a storm. It's been storming for the past couple of days. So today it's awesome. We get the nice random weather where there's no humidity in North Carolina.
I'm right there with you. I mean, obviously we're not geographically that far away from each other down in Atlanta. So it's actually, I walked out this morning, especially like let the dogs out at like 5:45 in the morning, and it's like, man, it's sweatshirt now. Like we're actually in a little bit of chill. It's only 75, 80 today, which
this awesome.
95. So
I'll take it in August. I will take it in August.
Every time, every single time. So awesome. Well, I know we've got folks in. We'll go ahead and get things started. Obviously recording, and we'll get this shared out on our YouTube channel. But we got a lot to talk about today, so we're going to dive right into it. Obviously, excited to have everybody here. For those that are joining for the first time and don't know much about shOPS Talk or Wizards of Ops, we'll give you a quick rundown on that. It was about this time last year. It's funny, Sarah and I were talking about this, who helps us coordinate all of these webinars. We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary pretty soon of shOPS Talk, which is wild to me. But the whole premise of this episode comes right along with the whole premise of our community, which is to elevate the operations world and to really make sure that everyone knows what they're doing, how they're doing it, and more importantly, how other folks are doing it. We're way better off acting as a group instead of acting solo. But yeah, about a year ago, the fine folks over at Salesforce, which obviously we always are appreciative of their support and the way they help us sponsor this episode, came to us and said, how can we help elevate the operations world? How can we get more operational badasses just like for us on these shows and help the rest of our community understand how other companies are operating and really just to share that knowledge, which is exactly why we're here today. So we'll jump right into it. I'm extremely excited about this guest in particular. I've known Feras now seemingly for decades, but in all reality for a few years. Him and I've now worked together from a Sonar perspective. He bought Sonar during his time at Pendo, as well as now at his time at Outreach. So just through the years of developing that relationship, as well as he's still my go-to person that I ask operational things on. Like, hey man, y'all are bigger than us. How are y'all doing this sort of thing? So I'm pumped to have him on. I'll stop hogging the mic. I'm going to pass it over to him to let him introduce himself, tell us a little about him, and then we'll get right into the meat of the topic. But for us, the mic is yours.
Absolutely, I appreciate it, Brad. Yeah, super excited. I feel like we've been talking about making this happen for a while now, and just super excited to finally make this a reality. And like you said, it's ops and RevOps is the thing now, right? It's the in category, and I love learning from other professionals and other RevOps leaders, and through various roundtables or shOPS talks like these, right? They're always super informative, and even if you just get that one idea out of it, right? That was a super beneficial hour from my perspective. So a little intro on myself. Started off in the sales realm. So out of college, went the SDR route, and then went to holding a bag and doing inside and outside sales. And serendipity kind of led me to being super interested in Salesforce. Was working at a large public company, and they didn't have a CRM. This is, crazy now, but didn't have a CRM. And I was tasked with being a part of the Tiger team to go find one, and became super interested in it, right? And just absolutely fell in love, and found myself, on YouTube at night, Trailhead classes and the whole nine. And now, close to a decade into operations, landed at Outreach, and absolutely love it. Managing, a portion of the RevOps team and working very closely with sales, and excited to work with Brad. I'll give the shameless plug of Sonar, since Brad was too humble to do it. But that's really what grew our relationship was using the Sonar tool at previous life, and when I joined Outreach, it was one of the first things I had on my to-do list. Like, I absolutely have to have this. So that's what allowed Brad and I to grow the relationship and solidify it. And now we're here.
I absolutely love it, and I obviously appreciate the kind words. I don't say this lightly, and Frost knows this. Like, I truly look at him as someone that I learn more from day in, day out, and even an advisor to us here on the Sonar side of things, helping us get better every day. We strongly leverage folks like Frost to make not only our platform better, but our message better and how we go about working on the operations side. I will say, I think the coolest thing about our relationship, and we'd be remiss if we didn't give Philip a shout out. We were talking about him a second ago. Sales brought ops together here, and this mentality, a mutual friend of ours, a guy that I bought Pendo from during his time at Pendo, actually introduced me to Feras and said, here we are. So I can't go too long without saying thank you to him. And I hope, Philip, you're watching. If not, we're going to send you the recording. But we're going to rewind the clock a little bit. And I think this is really cool. We're going to talk about some of your time at Pendo as well as being over at Outreach. But before we get too far into that, we always like to ask a poll question. So we'll go ahead and launch the poll now. It really is, what is the most challenging part of helping your RevOps team prioritize their work? That's the entire meat of this topic here. And it's been really cool to watch Frost do what he's done just over the years of managing a team. I think the first time that you and I ever talked, I think it was only a team of 2, maybe 3 at that time, including yourself. And we're going to get into how these org charts grow and how they look now. But prioritization is key. Like, we're not going to get our stuff done without being able to prioritize it. And so when we look at these responses, we're going to answer here as well. And so we would look at this. A lot of folks are coming in over the top, overloaded requests and tactical work. It is challenging. I think we're going to talk about why it's challenging in a second, but this whole RevOps framework makes it actually a little bit challenging. So you look at the results overwhelmingly, it looks like, the overloaded request is 63% of the responses. Lack of access to the right resources. We're going to talk about resources here in a second too. Unclear connections. None of these polls that we ever launch are always going to be a one-stop shop. Everybody picks one answer, but it is interesting to see that overwhelming side of the overloaded request. Doesn't surprise me at all. So,
yes.
And we're going to dive into those. These first couple of points, and we'll just dive right in. There's a structure to this. Start with structuring your RevOps team the right way. As we were prepping for this, this is why I love learning from Frost so much. He was dropping bombs on me the whole time, but I'll pass it over to you. What sticks out to you when you start to think of starting the structure of your RevOps team, especially as you're prioritizing your tasks?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think if we look at the RevOps, function as a whole, it's a pretty newish function with the branding of RevOps, but even so, with the amount of impact that we have on organizations, right? And I like to think of this as an S curve, right? There's always the, you start somewhere, then you're going up, and then you've mastered it. Well, we're far from mastering it, but I think we are on an incline, and that's a super exciting part of the X curve and of the process, but it's also probably the most difficult, right? Because you're changing the tire while you're driving down the highway, and you're trying to figure this out. And what I think is super important from a structuring your RevOps team, and RevOps leaders, I'm sure there's a bunch on the call now understand this. RevOps now is people get it, right? They're starting to really understand that we really need a RevOps function to meet the goals that we have to get to the milestones that we've set forth to our board, to the public, to whoever we all report to at the end of the day, right? And they're starting to get it, but they actually don't know what RevOps is. So what it looks like is an executive says, "Oh, okay, for us, you're now a team of 2. Here's 4 heads for next year, and now you can build a RevOps function." And from their perspective, right, they've checked the box. It's like, "Oh, okay, great, I funded a RevOps," but that's not it. That's only a small piece of it, right? And you really have to be able to put together, all right, what does it mean to fund RevOps? If I have 4 people, what should their functions be? Who do they support? Do I just take the sales ops team and then rebrand them? Hell no, right? Like, we all know that doesn't work. But that's what a lot of people do. And that's we went through that, as at Pendo, and we went through that evolution of, like, okay, here's the sales ops team. Now you have budget for tools like a Sonar, or, you know, further advances like a CPQ, right? Where it's an infrastructure for what you're going to do operationally. And then here's your people that you can have to orchestrate these things. And a lot of times, you know, we cut before we measure. And I feel like it's really important from a RevOps perspective to make sure you know exactly what those people are coming in to do, and you're setting them up for success, and you're setting up your organization for success as well. So
you're spot on. I'm going to give Keith Jones, you know Keith very well from WizOps. I think one of his most famous lines, and it goes without saying, measure twice, cut once. So when you said that, I was like, well, of course, I got to give Keith a shout out. I do want to say on the topic of how you structure these teams, and we asked you earlier, and we're going to share it now on the screen, how your teams have been structured and how they've been built. Because it's interesting, right? Like you have, I'm not going to steal your thunder. I actually want you to walk us through a little bit about what we're looking at, how you came to this conclusion, because it does help on the strategy and prioritizing your tasks. But yeah, help us understand exactly what we're looking at here and how we should think about strategizing these teams.
absolutely. And you know, this is you know, one of the big reasons why I decided to make a transition to outreach is also one, it's a badass product. So another shameless plug there. I got to do that. If you don't have outreach, call me. But aside from that, right, it's outreach is a leader in operations from a thought leadership perspective, right? And if we were, you know, doing everything the way that it's been done for years, then we're not moving forward. And the market's changing. Our function within an organization is changing as RevOps. The world is changing, right? Post-pandemic, it's really important to be able to support teams internally in the pivoting, right? We all learned what Q2 of last year. Hey, it's time to pivot to remote. It's time to pivot to how do we take care of our customers, not from a monetary perspective, but just to make sure they're okay and support them through the process, right? And we all kind of had to do that overnight, right? Nobody was prepared for that. And hopefully, knock on wood, this is the last medical pandemic we have, but there will be other pivots. 100%, right? That's the world we're living in. And what we're trying to do at Outreach with this org chart, and I'll walk through it here, is really be innovative here and think about it. And I know the initial probably response, and I would have thought about this 2 years ago as well, is holy crap, how did you get so many heads in RevOps, right? That's probably what people are thinking when they're looking at this, but that also highlights a very important part. You've got to have executive support. The C-suite has to understand the value of revenue operations. And if they don't, you got to keep pushing and you got to prove it, right? And it took us a while to do it. And we're fortunate enough to have a C-suite that does get revenue operations, because that is one of the personas we sell to. So we really understand revenue operations. But I think that's probably a shOPS talk all in itself, is how to convince C-suite to invest, right? But as you see here, we have our revenue operations team, and we're really now starting to brand it as revenue execution, because we are the team that's helping execute revenue, right? And we've split it into two groups, and there's the leaders are very important, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The left side here, which is the Rev strategy leader, and I got to give a shout out to my boy Jim Lee, who is my partner in crime at Outreach, and we there's an ongoing joke for everyone that we're like Tango and Cash. So if everybody references the early 90s movie, but that's really what we are. We're just literally putting out fires and dealing with things on a daily basis. But that connection between him and I is super important. I think I talk to him more than I talk to my family. So we're definitely on the same page. But Jim is a very cerebral, intelligent, understands data, understands trends, understands, hey, we need to know not where we're going around the corner, but where are we going, around 8 corners, right? Where are we going to be at the end of the puzzle? And so we really got to look at revenue strategy on that side as more of like the GPS, right? They're the route. They're telling us where we need to go, what's our end destination, where are the milestones, where are we stopping, where are we going? And his organization is split into a couple of different things, right? So you're looking at go to market and strategy, right? Think of territory design, think of segment design, think of the things that are probably 1, 2, 3 quarter function, or even a whole fiscal year, like your senior project, right? This is going to be your senior project for the year. That person and that team is really trying to understand the market. They're talking to other leaders. They're talking to potentially consultants, right? They're getting a lot of information together and really assuring that we're making a decision based on data and not just gut instinct or some leader that's like, yeah, I've seen this work great in the past. Because again, that's the past. Head of data and intel. I think of that as how does data talk to each other, right? Like how does your data enrichment process work with your top of funnel assignments, right? So looking at tools like a ZoomInfo and a DataFox, and how does that communicate over to the sales team and ensuring we're all on the same page. And then the platform strategy and operations, right? Using outreach at outreach, we should be the best possible customers of our own product, right? So we actually have dedicated resources to trying things out and making sure we're putting it together. So that's the revenue strategy side. Again, they're telling us where we're going. And then the right side, which is my organization specifically, is we're the ones on the day-to-day tactically, how do we get there, right? So if Jim's org is where we're going, my org is how we're getting there. And there's a couple of different functions here that I'll explain. So first, there's the core systems, right? And this is where you have your Scrum Master, your Agile framework. Think Jira, who's handling the tickets, who's handling the intake process, who's prioritizing, a Salesforce administrator, a Salesforce developer. That team is really the day-to-day just knocking things out, right? Core operations has a couple different functions. Sales ops is more traditionally what you would think of sales operations here. This is your business partners, right? This is the team that's interacting with either segment leaders or department leaders and functioning as their stakeholder kind of business partner to understand various things, right? Like books of business. Does every AE have the potential to hit their quota? Does, all that good stuff that you guys are all probably dealing with all the time anyways. The next two are, I consider, a little bit innovative. And I don't think this is a super popular or it's not found very often, right? Where everybody's talking about revenue operations and everybody confuses it with sales operations, but it's truly revenue, and CS and growth are revenue. So when I say growth, I mean our sales team is split between new logo and then install base. So our growth team is primarily around install base. And that operations team is just as important and just as vital as the sales operations team. And we have two heads there now, but I imagine through this next year, it'll look very, very similar to sales operations, right? I think that's super important. And then revenue deal desk is that's another one that's a relatively newer function. We have a financial deal desk, which everybody's usually pretty accustomed to as you grow as a company. The team that's looking at the details of an order, the net payment terms, the invoicing and all that good stuff, processing the orders, potentially provisioning the licenses and all that good stuff. What we're looking at here with the revenue deal desk on my team is who can be there to help a deal close. So a lot of the typical deal desk is post deal closing or maybe very upmarket, like helping pricing on a very upmarket perspective. But what if somebody runs into an issue within a Zora or a CPQ and is like, hey, I have this super funky deal, like Brad has X amount of dollars, he has X amount of users, and he wants these two products. Like, how can we put this together from a quoting perspective? We've already figured it out commercially. That person will jump in then and help them get deals across the board, right? So those are all the different functions within this org chart, and this is definitely fluid. It's going to grow, it's going to change, it's going to be adjusted, but this is where we've landed now, and so far we've seen tremendous impact from this structure.
I love it. It's so unique to me. There's a certain function of linear, there's a certain function of what a normal org chart looks like. But when I look at this, and I'm just gonna not take words out of your mouth here, keep me honest of my assumption of it. I think a lot of folks are going to look at this like, oh, cool, cool, cool. The left side of this, the rev strategy side is the strategy, and then the right side is the execution. And I kind of argue a little bit of that because we talk about strategy so much. I don't think it's binary. I look at all these roles. There's a lot of why we do it. I'm going to do it on the left side. Well, I guess for everybody looking on the TV on the other side of my hand, on the left side for like revenue strategy leader, like why are we going about doing this? This could be your other folks in other organizations that label us almost business operations. Like, why do we go and attack the markets we do, set the KPIs the way we do them, take these strategies? And of course, I do love seeing this. This is almost a 2-to-1 ratio of people, like the how do we go about doing that when we have the systems and tools, we have a director in charge of that. We do have admins, we do have dev. So there's just such a great little mix and dichotomy of why we do it and how we do it. And both of those have strategic pieces that go together. I know we've got like 2 more really big points we're going to kind of get through pretty quickly, but I love that how we went so wide in strategy, but every role in this picture that we're seeing right now has a strategic aspect to it. And
100%. And that's such a great point, right? If anybody's not, if anybody's doing anything that's not strategic or not based on the next 2 years or the next 3 years, right? Then what are we doing? We're just band-aiding, which everybody does on a daily basis in operations. So this is a way to get us away from band-aids.
Oh, you're spot on. You brought up one really good point, and we're going to come to it now. But I also want to save at least a little bit of time of like how we build this analogy of a roster that we've talked about. But we got to debunk it. We're going to talk about it. You and I talked about this in prep. There's a difference between sales ops and RevOps. Let's all put our hands together and like kind of clap harmoniously that there is a difference there. I remember, I'm going to turn it over to you, but when we were talking about this before, I had one of our customers come to us like, hey, I need somebody new to come in and own systems and own this stuff. Like, I need a Salesforce admin. I just don't think I'm able to cast a wide enough net. I'm just going to call it a RevOps manager. And my first reaction was like, one, my hands started getting sweaty like they are right now. And I just immediately put my hands in my face. Like, you're not doing that resource of any sort of favor by changing their title just so you can cast a wider net and get better folks. But I think it's a common misconception. I want your thoughts on it. I know we can probably go for another hour of like the differences, but like we talked about this. How should we be thinking about that? Why is it RevOps and not sales ops?
So many answers to that question. I mean, one, I think if you're an operational team and you're, everybody always, I won't say complains, but always talks about a blocker being operationally being that everybody's siloed. Well, if everybody's siloed, it's because you're not supporting everyone, right? If your CS organization is doing things one way and your sales operation or sales team is doing things another way, and then potentially your SDRs or demand gen marketing is doing things another way, right? Then of course it's going to be siloed because you're not actually bringing them together. And this is an important point too. It doesn't necessarily mean org chart. Like everybody always goes to org chart. It's not always org chart. It's having operations together, right? So we also implemented something called an ops council, where before we make any major decisions that touch multiple groups within the organization, we all come together and we make sure it doesn't hurt anyone else and falls in line with the plans of everyone else. And I think that's super important. For revenue operations, the thought that always goes to mind to me is we always do this really great job within sales ops of ensuring that the process is really easy to convert a prospect to a customer, right? That's it. But do we give enough support to keeping a customer and growing a customer, right? So any company that's, I've been lucky enough to work at 2 organizations that are pre-IPO, right? And what everybody always talks about, how do you acquire more customers and how do you retain more customers, right? And you're only doing one half of it if you're only looking at sales operations. And if you don't feel like you can support retaining a customer, then you're not doing operations right. Right? You got to look at usage. You got to look at, as you go up market, parent-child. Like, hey, what if a child account is a customer of mine? Well, obviously, everybody's going to want to know how to get the parent and then get some sort of ELA and get the children. Well, if you don't have a solidified operational process to do that, then people are just throwing darts at the wall, right? So revenue operations needs to handle it from pre-acquisition through the sales funnel to hey, how do we get this through a renewal? How do we grow this? How do we expand this account? How do we get to other business units? You gotta help support all of that.
Absolutely. Obviously, we met because of Philip when I was at Terminus.
Mhm.
One of the famous lines that Tim Kopp, the CEO of Terminus, would just pound his hands on the desk about: retention is the new acquisition, and that just stuck so much. Like, that's how you acquire new logos, acquire new revenue. Like, it's in the retention side. Now, it's a chicken and egg complex. You can't have retention without new business and sales.
Yeah.
So like they're very much perfect two peas in a pod, if you will, for that. But I was like, that just stuck with me. Like, retention is the new acquisition. It's so true. It's how you acquire more revenue. It's how you acquire more logos, more heads, whatever your pricing lever is. It's within your install base. So I just thought
100%. And look, I think that's a part of the branding of revenue operations is, some might hear that and say, well, what does operations have to do with retaining a customer? Right? So much. And I tell my team all that, that all the time whenever, luckily we're at outreach and outreach is badass and kicking ass with numbers every quarter. And, I congratulate my team every time we do that. I say, thank you. You're a big part of this. It's not just the AEs. This would not have been possible without you. And I think people got to understand that.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Now we're on the verge of this total new rebrand called retention operations. That's our pushing product.
Love it.
I know we're getting close to talk time, but I know the one thing that we talked about, we want to talk about here is positioning yourself as a strategic asset in your org, which will help you, again, create an org chart like you have. What's the secret sauce there about finding that strategic asset and building the right team?
Yeah, I think, well, it all comes down to impact, right? I think you become a strategic asset when you've proven impact to the organization. And from my perspective, the way I've I don't want to say done that because it's been a whole team of people behind me that have helped me do that. But the way I look at it is operationally, CEOs, C-suites in general, they're not experts on operations, right? They're not seeing the muddy water that's causing us to, only be able to go 5 miles per hour rather than 105 miles per hour, right? And you've got to be able to see their blind spots. And that's been my kind of trick is, all right, we're in a e-staff meeting or we're in a leadership meeting and we're talking about it and we're seeing stuff like, hey, this one segment, for example, maybe is not hitting the numbers like this other segment is. Right. And they're all trying to think about it from a sales perspective when it's really even above that and more of a go-to-market perspective. So then we look at it and we say, okay, operationally, for example, I look at that and I scope it and I discover it and I say, all right, well, it looks like, for example, this segment are mostly children to other parent accounts. So maybe we're running into blockers where we have a seller that's accustomed to selling to a 100-person company now talking to potentially a legal team or a finance team from a 2,500-person company, which is a very different skill set and conversation to have from a sales perspective. So again, the C-suite's not going to see that. We see that. So we may go in and say, all right, maybe we need to look at our rules of engagement. Maybe we need to assess what do we need to do here from an ROE perspective to ensure that the person that's in front of the customer has everything they need to close this deal. And we go through that thread a couple of times. And then you start having a couple of those wins that you present to leadership and you're saying, hey, by the way, 2 quarters ago in Q1, you guys mentioned this. Well, we've been working on that. And based on our discovery, we think the recommendation should be X, Y, or Z. And this is where we need to go. And you do that once, twice, 3 times, and you start solving problems that nobody really understands, then you by default become an asset to the organization, right? Because you're solving problems that one, people may not even see yet, or 2, they see it and they don't really know how to tackle it because it's more of an operational play than it is hey, maybe this is a sales methodology play. Like sales methodology doesn't fix that. It fixes a lot of other things. I'm a proponent, don't shoot me, but that's not a methodology play. That's more of a operational play there.
Yeah, you're spot on. And it goes to show, like, this one is like the key indicators, that you're moving into that strategic asset role when organically, like, look, we're the ones that are watching the process. We're holding and owning the data. We have to be able to tell that story. But there is no better feeling, and if anybody's on that wants to correct me, please, there's no better feeling than when that C-suite member comes back over to operations like, hey, I'm working on my board deck for last quarter's board presentation. Like, can we work on these graphs? Like, what does this story tell? What does this data point mean? You know, like,
100%.
you talk about that. Everybody gets that dopamine hit that we're always talking about. Like sales, obviously they go bang the gong. That's a big dopamine hit. For operations, that's the hit. It's like, man, the business is realizing that I'm strategic and they're looking for me for advice on how to look around that next corner. So
100%. 100%.
Time flies when you're having fun. We're already like at the top of the episode. So thank you for everyone that's still sticking around with us. I will ask you just a couple random like rapid fire questions. It's always fun. Some are on topic for ops, some aren't. But what's hot on your list right now as far as either on Netflix or Hulu? What are we streaming? What's your favorite episode right now of something?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I have a 3.5-year-old and a 10-week-old. So pretty much YouTube Kids is hogging the television, especially when it's not basketball or football season. I think from like I'm pretty basic business guy, so I'm a Shark Tank, The Profit, you know, all those shows are usually pretty high on the list. Other than that, man, I keep rewatching The Last Dance, you know, reliving the old days of the 90s with MJ.
Can't not watch that at least 5 times, especially if you're a rookie or a basketball guy. You have to watch that.
100%.
Yeah, I love it. My go-to answer is always Below Deck because it's just so fascinating to me how that whole like world works of yachting. But it's just, you're not watching that, go for it. Here's my last question because I know we're a little bit. Well, actually, I'm going to rewind it. I just got into a 100-foot wave. If you haven't started watching that on HBO Max, it's literally a documentary about these surfers that just go out and ride massive like 100-foot waves. It's mind-blowing how they
That's awesome.
put their bodies on waves. So last question, and we ask everybody this. If you were to rewind the clock back to your first couple of days, weeks, months, year into operations, what advice would you give yourself with where you are now? How would you help expedite your career? Because a lot of folks that are watching this, whether it be on this episode or so many people watching recordings, always looking for advice on how to grow their career. You know, looking back at yourself, what advice would you give yourself as you were starting your operations journey?
That's a great question. My advice would be slow down. So, and I say that for a couple of different reasons, right? One, I think people, you know, jump into operations, they find the things that are on fire and they just continuously chase the fire, right? And they're continuously chasing the things that are maybe not ideal, which you still have to do, of course, right? You have to put out the fires. But there's also the side of, hey, the things that aren't on fire now, how are you sure they're not going to be on fire next year? And getting ahead of it and being a lot more proactive rather than reactive. I think when I started my career, I was, again, trying to prove value. So I'm sitting there trying to solve problems. But then I'm realizing that the problems continue to occur until I like take a step back and say, all right, these are the 3 things I'm going to solve this year. If it's not these 3 things, I'm not spending my time on it. And it goes to your poll question, right? It's the overload of requests and asks that come in. We have to prioritize that. And as RevOps professionals, we have to be okay with saying no, but in a professional way, in the sense of like, no right now, but Q2, let's tackle this. That would be my piece of advice.
Oh, it's so spot on. It's so hard sometimes. We're all here for it, myself included. I'm not reviewing from it. We're in the weeds. And one of the hardest things to do is pull yourself out of the weeds at times and kind of get that 10,000-foot view. You know, see the forest through the trees. They always say it's tough. Like, that is not an easy thing to do. I always say the most badass RevOps leaders that I know, you being one of them, has just this innate ability to be able to zoom in all the way down to the inch, to the centimeter, and then snap your finger and go 10,000 feet and 100%. See the same problem in 2 lenses. And
you have to, absolutely have to.
You nailed it, dude. I know we're a few minutes over. Thank you for everybody on hanging out with us and still hanging around. Obviously, we'll have this up on YouTube pretty quickly, be able to share it with everyone. But Feras, I can't thank you enough for hanging out with us and dropping some knowledge on us, man. I really appreciate
you having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, stay tuned, everyone. Obviously, we have more episodes around the way, but we'll let everybody get back to their Wednesday. Have a great afternoon. Talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.